She texted him first.
Not the police, not a friend, not a family member. On the morning of August 13th, 2018, the morning a pregnant woman and two little girls disappeared from a house in Frederick, Colorado, the first person to reach out to Chris Watts was the woman he had been sleeping with for 6 weeks. Her name was Nichol Kessinger.
And the message she sent him, the message she described to investigators herself, was not, "Are you okay?" It was not, "I saw the news, what's happening?" It was not even, "Where are you?" It was, "What did you do, Chris?"
What did you do? Not, did something happen? Not, I'm worried. What did you do? That question has haunted this case for 8 years because the woman who asked it, a woman who was never charged, never placed under oath, never formally required to answer a single question in a court of law, knew something in that moment that the rest of the world was still trying to figure out.
Inside that house, 3 people were already gone. A 4th had never had the chance to arrive. And the man who put them there was about to stand in front of a camera and ask the public to help find his family. But before he did any of that, before the cameras, before the performance, before the lie went public, he replied to her message with 4 words of his own. "I didn't hurt my family, Nikki." That was the last thing he ever said to her. What she said back, what she knew, what she suspected, what she had known perhaps longer than she ever admitted, is the story that nobody finished telling. Until now. From the outside, Chris and Shanann Watts were what people meant when they said couple goals. They lived in a 2-story house in Frederick, a suburb north of Denver, so clean and orderly it barely seemed real. Chris worked in oil and gas. Shanann built a social media following selling health supplements. They had Bella, 4 years old, and Celeste, 3. 2 little girls who appeared in every post, every video, every moment Shanann shared with the world. They were, in the words of the Netflix documentary that would later tell their story, the family next door. Because that is exactly what they looked like. Until August 2018, when the world discovered what was living underneath that picture. By the summer of 2018, Chris Watts had mentally and emotionally abandoned his marriage. He had lost 60 pounds. He had remade his body. And somewhere inside that transformation, he had decided he wanted a completely different life. One that did not include the pregnant wife sleeping next to him or the 2 daughters down the hall. In letters he would write years later from a Wisconsin prison cell, Watts described Shanann as a control freak. He said their marriage had become suffocating. He said he felt invisible inside his own home. What is not in dispute is what he chose to do about it. In June of 2018, Chris Watts walked into a colleague's office. He was not wearing a wedding ring. He told her his name. He told her he had 2 daughters. He told her his marriage was essentially over. Separated, he said. Divorce nearly finalized. Just the financial details left to sort. Her name was Nichol Kessinger. She was 30 years old, a field engineer at the same company. And she believed him. Within weeks, they were dating. By July, they were meeting several times a week. By August, while Shanann and the girls were visiting family in North Carolina, Chris Watts was staying at Nichol Kessinger's apartment almost every single night, living 2 lives in 2 houses, a husband and father by registration, a single man by performance. On August 12th, 2018, Shanann returned home from a work trip. Her friend walked her to the door. Security footage captured her entering the house at 1:48 in the morning. She was 15 weeks pregnant. She was home. She was safe. She was never seen alive again.
By the time the sun came up that morning, Chris Watts had strangled his wife in the bed they shared. He had suffocated his daughters. He had loaded his family into his work truck and driven 40 miles to the oil field where he worked. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave in the earth. He submerged Bella and Celeste in crude oil storage tanks. Then he drove home, ate, and waited.
Later that morning, he stood in front of his house and spoke to a television camera. He described Shanann as his rock. He said he hoped his girls were somewhere safe. He asked the public to help bring his family home. He knew exactly where they were. Investigators watching the footage flagged his affect immediately. He used the past tense when speaking about his daughters. He wept without producing tears. He gave a media interview before being formally asked to. He was, in the language of behavioral analysis, performing grief rather than experiencing it. On August 15th, investigators brought him in, 2 days after the murders. They told him the neighbor's security camera had captured his truck leaving early that morning. They implied they knew more than they were letting on.
He confessed. The first version blamed Shanann. He claimed he had seen her strangle the girls and that he had acted in rage. That version was a lie. He would later recant it. Across multiple interviews, his account shifted so many times that not a single version can be taken as definitive truth.
Multiple interviews. His account shifted so many times that not a single version can be taken as definitive truth. What did not change was the outcome. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn son, whom the family named Nico after he was gone. 5 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. He has been at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, ever since.
For a man with no future, Chris Watts has been remarkably busy constructing one. From inside Dodge Correctional Institution, he has been writing long, handwritten letters filled with scripture, spiritual reflection, and a version of events that grows more convenient with each passing year. He found God in prison. Or rather, he built a God patient enough to forgive Chris Watts, which is, by any theological measure, an extraordinary amount of patience.
He writes to pen pals. He compares his suffering to Christ's crucifixion. He calls himself a new man. He says God does not see him as the person who committed those acts. And he blames Nichol Kessinger for everything. In a letter addressed directly to God, obtained and verified by multiple outlets, he wrote, "I was misled. I was tempted by a harlot. I was weak, and I allowed myself to be fooled by an evil woman. She led me from the path of righteousness. I know that you will deal with her someday. She will be judged." In another letter, he wrote, "The words of a harlot have brought me low. Her flattering speech was like drops of honey that pierced my heart and soul. Little did I know that all her guests were in the chamber of death." He was quoting Proverbs 7. The biblical passage describes a seductive woman who lures a man to his destruction. A woman whose house, the text says, is the path to death. Chris Watts was not just calling Nichol Kessinger names. He was casting her as the biblical architect of everything that happened. He was saying, she is the reason my family is dead. But it is letter 3 that broke the case open in the public mind. In a letter to his pen pal, Shanann, obtained and reported by multiple verified outlets, Chris Watts made a claim that no investigator had ever publicly documented. A claim that, if true, would rewrite the entire timeline of what happened on the night of August 12, 2018. He wrote that on the night of the murders, the night Shanann came home, Nichol Kessinger had issued him an ultimatum. She forced him to choose, he said, between her and his family. She demanded a decision. She told him it was time. She forced me to choose between her and my family on the night of the murders. She was the forbidden fruit. The cost of that choice was everything.
Let that land for a moment. A convicted killer, a man serving 5 life sentences, a man who has lied about these events so many times that no version of his story can be taken at face value, is claiming that on the very night his pregnant wife came home, the woman he was sleeping with called him and told him to decide. He is claiming there was a phone call, a conversation, a demand, an ultimatum delivered in the hours before Shanann Watts was strangled in her own bed. He is claiming that Nichol Kessinger put pressure on him that night. Investigators have never confirmed this. Law enforcement has never acted on it. And Nichol Kessinger, who could refute it, confirm it, or simply acknowledge it, has said nothing. Because Nichol Kessinger cannot be found. That is the man in the house. That is what he is saying from his prison cell. That is what nobody has been able to verify, and nobody has been able to disprove. Before August 2018, Nichol Kessinger was not a name anyone knew. She was 30 years old, a field engineer, ambitious, outdoorsy, private. By every account available from people who knew her, she was someone building a life on her own terms. Someone looking, as she would later describe it to investigators, for something real. She had never spoken to Chris Watts before he walked into her office. He told her he was separated. He said the divorce was nearly done. He made her believe she was not the reason a marriage was ending. She was simply the person a man had found after it already had. She believed him, and she fell. By July, she was searching Google for wedding dresses. She researched what it meant to marry a man who had been previously married. She searched marrying your mistress. She spent hours, documented, time-stamped hours, building a future in her imagination with a man who was still fully, legally, completely married to a woman who was carrying his child. She was, by digital evidence, a woman in love, or at minimum, a woman planning.
But here is where the story stops being straightforward. When investigators examined Nichol Kessinger's phone in August 2018, they found the wedding dress searches. They found the marrying your mistress searches. They found the research into what happens when a man leaves his wife for his affair partner. And buried underneath all of it, predating the affair, according to the timeline documented by investigators, they found something else entirely. They found the name Shanann Watts.
The prosecutor handling the case said publicly that he could not explain the data from her phone. He said it, on record. And then the case moved on, and nobody followed that thread to its conclusion. And Nichol Kessinger was never put in a room under oath and asked, "Why did you search that name?" A woman who told investigators she had no idea Chris Watts was truly married, who said she discovered the truth only when his family's disappearance made the news, had searched the name of his wife before she claims to have known his wife existed. That search has never been explained. Not by Kessinger, not by investigators, not by the prosecution, not by anyone. It sits in the public record like an open wound that nobody has been willing to close.
On August 20th, 2018, one day after Chris Watts was formally charged with the murders of his wife and daughters, Nichol Kessinger went online. She did not search for support resources for victims' families. She did not search for grief counseling. She did not search for Shanann Watts Foundation, or for Bella and Celeste's names, or for any of the people who had just been confirmed dead. She searched for Amber Frey.
If that name is unfamiliar, Amber Frey was the mistress of Scott Peterson, convicted in 2004 for murdering his pregnant wife, Lacey. Frey cooperated with investigators, wore a wire during recorded phone calls with Peterson, and later published a best-selling book about her experience. She became, in the public imagination, the mistress who survived. Kessinger's documented searches that day included Frey's book deal, her net worth, and the question, did people hate Amber Frey? On the day after 3 people were confirmed murdered, on the day after a pregnant woman and 2 little girls were officially declared victims of the man Nichol Kessinger had been sleeping with, she was not searching for them. She was searching for herself. She was calculating the market rate for the role she had just been cast in. She was benchmarking her own survival against the last famous mistress in a case that looked just like this one. That is not the behavior of a woman in shock. That is the behavior of a woman making calculations. Before she disappeared, Nichol Kessinger said something to a detective that has never stopped echoing. She said,
I think a lot of people are probably going to assume I was a catalyst. She said she believed the next 5 to 10 years were not going to be easy for her. She cooperated with investigators. She handed over her phone. She gave multiple statements that investigators noted were not entirely consistent across sessions. She was never charged. And then she began, methodically and completely, to disappear. In 2020, she legally changed her name. Multiple outlets have reported she now goes by Nicole Miller, but this has never been officially confirmed by any court record or law enforcement agency.
Some reports suggest she may have received assistance from law enforcement in relocating. None of this has ever been confirmed.
What is confirmed is the result. 8 years later, despite sustained effort from investigative journalists, true crime communities, and online search groups, Nichol Kessinger is effectively invisible. She has not been interviewed. She has not been seen. She has not been placed under oath. She has not answered the question she herself predicted people would ask. Here is what is beyond dispute. Chris Watts strangled his pregnant wife and suffocated his 2 daughters on the morning of August 13th, 2018. He drove their bodies to an oil field and concealed them in the earth and in the tanks. He lied about it on camera. He is in prison. He will die there. The justice system, on that count, functioned exactly as it was designed. Here is what is not beyond dispute. From his prison cell, with no legal obligation to tell the truth and every motivation to shift blame, Chris Watts has claimed that on the night of the murders, Nichol Kessinger called him and issued an ultimatum. She demanded he choose. She forced the moment. He is a convicted murderer, a documented liar, a man who has given at least 3 contradictory versions of the same events. His account cannot be trusted. And her phone contained a search for Shanann Watts before the affair began. The prosecutor said he could not explain it. Nobody ever has. Her search history on the day after Watts was charged was not about the victims. It was about her own public image in a story that had not yet been written. Her statements to investigators were noted as inconsistent. The inconsistencies were documented. They were not pursued. She predicted, in her own words, that people would assume she was a catalyst. And then she vanished. Nobody put Nichol Kessinger under oath. Nobody asked her in a formal legal proceeding what she searched and why. Nobody asked what was said between her and Chris Watts on the night of August 12th. Nobody asked what she knew when she typed those 4 words, "What did you do, Chris?" before the world had any reason to ask them. Those questions were never formally asked, and so they remain suspended.
Their names were
unresolved,
Shanann,
open.
Bella,
In the file
Celeste,
of a case the system closed
and Nico,
in November 2018,
the name his family gave him after
and
he
the
was
rest
gone,
of the world
because he
has
deserved
never
one.
been able to close since.
Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She had fought through lupus. She had fought through debt. She had built a business, built a home, built a family, and built a life on social media that tens of thousands of people followed because she was warm and loud and completely herself. She had no idea what was sleeping next to her. Bella was 4. She loved unicorns. She called her little sister Cece. She had a personality, by every account, that filled a room and kept going long after she left it. Celeste was 3. Quick and stubborn and bright, and already completely herself at an age when most children are still figuring out who they might become.
Nico would have been born in January 2019. He would be 6 years old now, starting school, learning to read his own name. We do not know what he would have been like. We will never know. And that particular grief
belongs to a category that has no adequate language. These 4 people are the reason this case matters. Not the affair, not the prison letters, not the unanswered questions about Nichol Kessinger, not Chris Watts' theological reinvention, not any documentary or podcast or episode, including the one you are watching right now. All of it, all of this, exists in the shadow of 4 people who were taken from the world by someone who was supposed to love them. The reason we return to these questions is not morbid curiosity. It is because the full truth of what happened and what led to that morning has never been completely told.
Chris Watts is where he belongs. That much is done. But the woman who was there, not in the house, not at the oil field, but present in every decision that built toward that morning, is somewhere living a life. Under a different name, in a city no one can find, unreachable. And by every legal standard that currently exists, free. Whether that is the end of the story is a question only you can answer. This story does not end here. It does not end with this episode, or the next, or any platform that has ever covered it.
It ends, if it ever ends, when the people who loved Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico are no longer carrying questions that should have been answered by a system built to pursue the truth. If you know something about the events surrounding August 13th, 2018, about communications, conversations, or details that were never part of the official record, the Weld County District Attorney's Office has not closed this conversation. Neither has Shanann's family, who have spent 8 years making sure the world does not reduce 4 lives to a case number. You do not need to be certain. You only need to decide whether what you carry is something that deserves to be said out loud. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico Watts were real. They are not content. They are not a storyline. They are people whose absence leaves a shape in the world that nothing, not a conviction, not 5 life sentences, not 8 years of time, has yet managed to fill. Hold that.